Now it's time to talk about wedding reception lighting. And I know there's a lot of wedding photographers out there, or photographers that want to be wedding photographers, that just claim, well, I like shooting natural light, I don't really want to use strobe. And that's fine in many cases, but when it comes to lighting the reception, you really have to bring strobes. I mean, in some cases, receptions are taking place outside at night and there's no lighting whatsoever. If they do take place inside, it's usually lit by DJ lights, which are crazy white balances, or there's decorative lighting on the walls or something, but no light on the subjects whatsoever. If you want your pictures to turn out good at all, you're going to have to learn to use strobes. So basically, there's unlimited ways that you could light a reception, but what we've done is we've come up with 4 methods that we use at a lot of different weddings that we shoot, and we're going to go through them one by one, and in many cases you're going to choose one that's your favorite, but it's really important that you learn the aspects of each one so that when you get to that certain wedding with that strange lighting situation, you're going to know how to deal with it. My #1 method for lighting receptions is a simple bounce flash. This is the system that I also use while the bride and groom are getting ready. It's really just the go-to, easiest method for lighting any situation when you're indoors. Bounce flash is simply using the flash on top of your camera, angled towards walls or ceilings, to create soft directional light on your subjects. For the first few years that I shot weddings, there was really no difference in my lighting technique when I went from, shooting the bride getting ready to the reception that took place later that night. Obviously, I was changing some of my camera settings, but I was basically just bumping up the ISO and still bouncing light off of a ceiling or off of a wall. So a few years into my wedding photography career, I decided that my reception pictures might be a little bit boring, and I decided to add what we call a kicker light in the background, which is basically just an on-camera flash on a light stand connected to a pocket wizard that fires behind my subjects. And what it does, it helps cut them out. It's kind of like a hair light in the background, and it helps separate them from the background. So let's go to a real wedding and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. So there's a ton of different ways that you can shoot every reception, and basically my go-to method is bouncing flash into the ceiling. If there's a white ceiling or a white wall available, that's the easiest way to get super sharp, great looking images. The problem is that in many cases the subjects can still get lost in the background. If the subjects are lit from the front, but then their hair is dark or the back of their heads are dark, and then the background is also dark, it's sometimes hard to see them. And so what we do is we put lights, little SB800s or SB900s on light stands like this with pocket wizards attached, and we use these to light the subjects from behind, and we call these kicker lights. And what these do, sometimes you'll see them kind of flaring in the background. I like the flare personally. I think it adds to the image, makes it a little bit more exciting, but at the same time it will also cut your subject out. So instead of them just being a lit subject with kind of dark all around them, now they're going to have a nice white hair light above them, and it's just going to make everything look a little bit more professional. Everything's going to look studio lit, and my clients really like the look as well. During most receptions, you're going to be taking dancing pictures, and there's going to be DJ lights and everything going crazy, and you kind of want to mimic that. You can't really use DJ lights because usually the colors are so crazy that you could never white balance it correctly. So by putting these lights in the background, it just continues to have that party feeling, and that's why I like it. It just adds a little bit more to the picture and makes it look professional. With these new pocket wizards, these are the +3s that we're using, we can put all of the lights on the same channel, but then also set them to different groups. So basically what you're able to do now is have 4 lights set to channel 17, but each light is A, B, C, and D, and then I can easily hit those letters on my pocket wizard to say, I just want A and D to fire, or maybe you just want A to fire, and you can turn the other 3 off. And that's really helpful because as you walk around the room, I don't want light coming from the front. I don't want it to look like direct flash. I just want these lights to be lighting up the back of my subjects. So as I travel around the room, whatever light is closest to me, I will turn that light off. The cool thing is, with any light that's in the background, the white balance doesn't have to be perfect. So you could gel these if you wanted to, you could make them really warm, or you could make them blue. In this situation, this room is already lit with a very orange color. So what I may actually do is gel my camera's flash red so it matches the other ambient light in the room. and then leave this light so that it's not gelled. And what that's going to do, once I white balance correctly for my gelled flash, this light will appear blue in the pictures. And it's gonna, again, just give a totally different look to the pictures that other people with point and shoot cameras would never be able to produce. So my basic camera setup during all receptions is the same. I have an on-camera flash on my hot shoe, and then I have a PC sync cord running to a Pocket Wizard that is dangling from my camera. It's kind of a strange setup, and people will ask like why I do it that way. But the reason is that I use my on-camera flash as the key light, but then I also need a Pocket Wizard to fire all the other lights in the room. And I don't like using Nikon's Creative Light system that allows you to use the strobe light to fire the other lights in the room, because I feel like it's not very reliable, and it also makes your flash lose power if you need full power bursts. So your batteries are gonna run out faster, and you're not gonna have as strong of a full power shot. So I just think the Pocket Wizard dangling off to the side, it's a little strange, but you get used to it, and I use this setup at every single wedding. So let's go over a few of the advantages of using bounce flash with a kicker light in the background during the reception. First of all, I think it's probably the easiest. You're going to have a flash on your camera anyway, shooting the rest of the day. So basically you're not really changing your method at all. And all you're doing is bumping up your ISO, maybe dragging the shutter a little bit more to burn in a little bit of the ambient light. But basically, you're not having to buy any extra gear. You're not having to set up much more complicated stuff. You don't need extra people involved in lighting your subjects. You're basically just bouncing light yourself, and the pictures look great. One of the other advantages is, of course, that by lighting up a wall or a ceiling and bouncing light into a room, you're lighting up large areas of the room. So shooting your subjects becomes a lot easier that way. You're gonna have bright, airier pictures, which you may or may not like, but it's something to keep in mind when deciding how you wanna light your subjects. Now, of course, there are some disadvantages to using bounce flash, and probably the biggest disadvantage is the fact that you're lighting up the entire room. And what you're doing is you're killing the ambiance. So if you have a really dim looking reception area and you start bouncing light into the ceiling, all of a sudden that reception might look like it took place during the day. And I don't know if many clients can really tell the difference, or I don't know that they really expect one thing or another when it comes to lighting for reception pictures, but it's something that you as a photographer need to think about. If you want dark, moody looking images, then bounce flash is not the direction that you need to go. Another disadvantage of using bounce flash in certain situations is that your flash may really have to work overtime. Depending on the color of the walls or the ceilings or the height of the ceiling, your flash may have to fire at full power every single flash. And that may not be a problem unless you want to take a lot of pictures rapidly, and you're going to need to give your flash about 3 seconds to recycle, and you're going to have to change batteries very often. Keep in mind that with these new cameras, you can really crank up the ISO. I shoot weddings all the time at 3200 ISO or 6400 ISO, and that's going to allow you to lower the power of your flash, and you're not going to have to worry about changing batteries quite as much. There's a lot of photographers in town that love this look. They think it adds a little bit of fun and excitement to the pictures. And then I've got other photography friends that hate it, and they say they don't want flashes going off in the background. So basically, it's just a personal decision. If you like it, you can do it. If not, do something else. When I was first getting started with wedding photography, I had some studio lights that I had bought, and I was really excited to bring those to weddings and kind of up the production value. And I was finding any way to use them that I could. And of course, one of the main reasons that I bring studio lights to my weddings is so that I can light up the entire church for pose pictures after the ceremony. But in some cases, I will also use my studio lights to light up the entire reception. In many of the venues in Charleston, the ceilings might be white, but the ceilings are 30 feet in the air, and my little on-camera flash is not powerful enough to fire all the way up into the ceiling and then bounce all the way back down on my subjects and shoot at a reasonable ISO. So the only option at that point is either to bounce off a wall, but you may not have a white wall, or you may not have a wall near you, or the other option is to use studio strobes to light up the entire room. So in some situations, I'll show up to the reception site early, I'll bring 1000-watt lights and fire them into the ceiling, and then at that point I have no problem with flash power at all because the entire room looks studio lit. There's really unlimited ways to light a reception site, And tonight I'm going to do things two completely different ways. First of all, I'm going to be carrying around a camera with a air remote that's for my ProPhoto head here. I'm going to raise this thing up and fire it into the ceiling. And what's gonna happen is the ceiling's tall enough here that I can light this entire room with a single light. I'm gonna set this thing to half power so I get a really quick refresh rate, and I can shoot all night long, and it's almost going to make this place look like it's day no matter how dark it gets outside. It's gonna be really soft, even light, and no matter what direction I shoot from, every image is gonna look almost exactly the same. Basically what you're doing when you're shooting a studio strobe into a ceiling that's that tall is you are lighting up the entire room. At this point, you don't really need to worry about the direction that you're shooting or who you're shooting because everybody is very, very evenly lit. And this of course has pluses and minuses. I do kind of like the way that it looks. It looks very bright, airy, commercial looking, but at the same time, you lose all ambiance. If the room was dark before, it looks like it's the midday at this point. And so you're going to, again, have to decide what type of vibe do you want your reception pictures to give off. If you want your pictures to look anything like the night when you are actually taking the pictures, then firing studio strobes into the ceiling is probably not a good decision because you are going to completely change the vibe of that room. Basically, I bring some studio strobes to every single wedding that I shoot just because I never know when I'm going to need that extra little bit of power. I mean, I might think that the reception ceilings are reasonable enough to use bounce flash, but then when I get in there, maybe instead of being painted white, they're painted gray. And my bounce flash just cannot fire enough light to light up my subjects. And at that point, I can grab my studio light, set it up on a light stand, and light is really not an issue anymore. If you're going to light the reception venue with studio lights, you may not need an on-camera flash at all because you can just stick a Pocket Wizard on your camera and the entire place is being lit up so evenly that there may not be any reason to have an on-camera flash. Here are some examples of weddings where I have used studio strobes to light up the entire venue. You'll notice that everything is very bright, very white looking. The white balance is so perfect because I'm not dealing with mixed white balance at all. And again, you may like this style, you may hate it, but that's up to you to figure out.
So I'm here in the Cotton Dock at Boone Hall Plantation, and this is one of the most popular venues probably to get married here in Charleston, but it's also notoriously one of the hardest venues to photograph a reception in because as you can see, it's a total barn. And the walls are completely made of dark wood. So if you were to bounce light in this situation, you're gonna get really bad color casts and your power on your flash is just gonna be cut down quite a bit because it's not gonna be very effective bouncing off of these walls. So right here, we're here a little bit early, so there's a lot of natural light in here, so you can pull off really great shots just shooting at high ISO. But in a few hours, it's gonna be pitch black in here and you're going to have to use light in some way to pull off any kind of photos in this room. So you're probably asking yourself, what can you do if you can't bounce light off of a ceiling? And for this third lighting setup, we're just gonna put lights around the room facing in towards the dance floor where everybody's going to be partying. And kind of the idea is just to have multiple lights that are acting as key lights and rim lights and just lighting up the entire area with direct flash. So the way I used to do this was I would put 2 or 3 lights up facing the middle of the dance floor and I would set them all on maybe channel 1, 2, or 3 with the Pocket Wizards and I'd fire everything all at once and I had very little control. But Pocket Wizard now has the new +3 units that allow you to not only put everything on one channel, but you can subdivide them into different groups. And this is great because I can put all 3 or 4 lights maybe on channel 17, but then I can assign them A, B, C, or D. So as I'm shooting the reception and I quickly need to turn off one light, I can just turn off that subgroup and it's gonna make it a lot easier to get the lighting that I need at that particular moment. So in many instances here at the reception, I want primarily a key light lighting my subject from the front, but then I also want a rim light separating them from the back. But because I'm gonna be moving around the room and I never know exactly where the action's going to be, I need a flexible way to turn the lights on and off. And now with the +3 units, it makes it really easy to control up to 4 lights and I have complete control right here on the camera. So when you're talking about flash photography, typically a softer light source is going to look better on your subjects. And with a softer light source, you're talking about a larger light source. So we can set up a couple lights here on light stands around the room with just bare bulb flashes pointing straight into the crowd or the dance floor. But I also a lot of times fit my light stands with umbrellas because it just allows the light source to be a little bit larger. Now, of course, when you set these up, you're gonna have these huge umbrellas that are gonna be high up into the ceiling, and that can kind of be a distraction. It can really take away from the decor that they've set up here in the reception. But it's kind of a trade-off. You can either get really nice light with umbrellas, or you can be a little bit less intrusive and have lights that are smaller, but they're gonna be harsher. So you can do a lot of different things with modifiers, but the whole idea is to send a lot of light into the middle of this room with the flashes that you've set up around the room. During a reception, it's probably wise to fit them with sandbags as well so that you don't have any lights falling over. The higher you raise your lights, or the heavier the light, the more sandbags you're going to want to put at the bottom so that you don't have any problems if somebody bumps into them. So I'm going to use 3 different light sources. 2 of them are going to have umbrellas, and 1 of them is going to just be a bare bulb speed light that's going to be a very hard light source. All of them are set to channel 17. The ones with umbrellas are going to be A and B, and then the hard light is going to be C. So let's see what this setup looks like once we put them in place and we turn all of them on. So I've set up 3 lights here, and they're just all firing at me. Obviously, if this was a real wedding, I'd want to put these lights really far away, but I want to show you guys what they look like in the frame. So I have group A, B, and C. And what I'm going to do is just turn these on one by one. This is channel 17A, so this is going to be a soft umbrella from up high. And I'm going to go ahead and take a picture of myself with just that one light source. And you can see that's going to add really nice light from the side. I'm going to turn that off and now just turn on B, and it also is an umbrella, but I've set that just a little bit lower in height. So I'm going to show you what a photograph looks like with just that on. And you can see that produces really nice side light as well. I'm then going to turn on group C, which is the rim light in the back. And I'm going to keep B on so you can see what it does to separate the background. And just for demo purposes, I'm going to turn off the one to my left and turn A back on so you can see what the other side would look like. So this is group A, another umbrella key light with the kicker light group C in the background. I'm now going to turn all 3 of them on. This is A, B, and C, just so you can see how much light this produces. And this might be a little much. You're really getting rid of all of the shadows, which I personally like in the photos. But if you needed to light a large area and go with a very safe shot, this would be a nice alternative just to fire all 3 in, and you know that you're going to get really soft light from all angles. So one thing to keep in mind when you set up lights around the room, all facing towards the dance floor, is typically when I walk around a room, I'm going to turn off the light that's closest to me. And the reason for that is that light source is going to be the most on axis, and it's going to look the most similar to direct flash. And the whole purpose of setting these lights on stands is to get away from the direct flash look. So if you can position yourself 45 degrees or more away from your key light, it's going to produce really nice light that just looks very different from what anybody else would be doing with direct flash. So as you look through these examples of images that were shot in this reception hall, the lighting setup might be slightly different, but we're basically doing the exact same thing. We're using off-camera lights on light stands to light up the dance floor, or we're using assistants to walk around and light for us. I'm about to show you exactly how we do that lighting setup next, but the whole idea here is that you need to bring in your own nice, clean, white light in these reception halls where you may only get red light if you were to bounce off the ceiling. So this lighting setup, I mean, I'll be honest, I don't use this very often. I only really reserve this for situations like this where I'm in a barn or I'm in a building with huge ceilings and there's just no way to bounce light at all. But I think it's really important for you to have this lighting setup maybe tucked away in your car so that if you're faced with this situation, you can pull it out and get really nice lighting quickly and easily. Another thing that makes this setup very difficult to use is I don't have direct control over the power of my flash units. So I'm very aware how close people are to my lights as they're dancing. And so if a couple gets closer to one particular light, I might turn it off, or I might just dial my camera's aperture down lower so that maybe I'm shooting at f4 or 5.6 now, so the light's a little bit less powerful, but the exposure's still correct. So basically, as I'm walking around the venue, taking shots, I'm changing my aperture so that I get the correct exposure every time. This does take a little bit of practice, but after you do it a few times, it becomes easier and easier, and it's so much better than trying to pull off a great shot with no flash at all. So I basically use this lighting setup here at this venue, but I also use it, there's a venue that's an aquarium where the ceilings are really high, but they're all painted black, so you can't bounce light off of the ceiling as well. And also this is really good when you're shooting those venues outside where you have no ceiling to bounce off of at all. You can set up a couple lights, sandbag them down, put umbrellas in them, and you can light up huge areas outside so that you can still get great dancing photos without having to direct flash. So keep in mind, guys, when you're just getting started, you're probably not going to have the budget to have 3 light stands and 3 strobes and a bunch of umbrellas. But now with the high ISO performance found in these current DSLRs, you can really bump the ISO up, you can use faster lenses, and if you just have one light setup, it's really going to help you produce great photos where 3 of these might be a little overkill. But down the road, when you get to bigger weddings, it's nice having the options of turning on specific lights so that you can get the best photograph possible. Another lighting setup that we do from time to time is we will actually have an assistant walk around with a speed light with a Pocket Wizard setup and do off-camera lighting for us at the reception. And this is really helpful when you're in those situations where maybe the venue has a really bad ceiling. It might be made of wood, it might be painted black, it may be a color that's just not going to allow for really good bounce flash. And having off-camera lighting is going to produce really flattering light that adds a lot of drama to your photos. In the past, we used to just hold up a bare bulb flash and have a really hard directional light, and that can look really cool. But then we started putting that speed light into a softbox just to give a little softer light for our subjects. And the problem with using a softbox is they're so large that if you're walking around the dance floor, it's just really obtrusive, and you really stand out, you really can't hide within the crowd. So what we do now is we put a speed light inside a flash disc, and because the profile of the flash disc is so much smaller than a softbox, it's just a lot less obtrusive. You still get the soft light look, and I just really think it's the easiest way to do off-camera lighting at the reception. So in all of these examples, I've put the flash disc on the speed light, and then I've attached that to a monopod. And I just find this is a little easier for my assistant to walk around, and it's also a little bit easier to get the light up high. But keep in mind, this setup is so small that you could just hand hold this, and as long as you get the light above your subjects, it's going to look really flattering. So there's a couple advantages to using this setup. The first is that you can really light the subjects right in front of you and then burn in the ambient light that's naturally found at the venue. The problem with bouncing light on the ceiling is it lights up everything and it really kills the whole mood of the reception hall. So if you want your images to really have a moody look and to really utilize the ambient light that might already be there at the venue, having directional light right in front of the camera but just off camera is going to be the best way to accomplish that. Another huge advantage to this setup is you might find yourself in situations where you have no ceiling to bounce off of, or the ceiling that you do have to bounce off of is just going to produce color casts. And perhaps the only way to get around that might be to direct flash. And as you can see in these examples here, direct flash never really looks that good. Because direct flash is right above the camera, you're going to be left with images that have very harsh shadows, the lighting is going to be very flat, and because of the fall off, subjects closest to your camera are going to be very bright, and then subjects just a few feet away are going to be very dark. So you're going to wind up with images that are just very unflattering, and the photographs are going to look just like all of the images that everybody else is taking at the wedding. And if you're trying to distinguish your work from everybody else, that's probably the last thing that you want to do. So in those situations, I usually go to this off-camera directional light setup, and it produces images that still look really good when I might not be able to bounce flash. There are a few big disadvantages to using off-camera directional lighting. The first one's going to be you have to use an assistant to light for you. So if you only bring 1 or 2 assistants to your weddings, one of them is going to be a full-time lighter, and it's going to be very hard to have them going around taking photos of the guests. Another disadvantage of using this setup is it's very difficult to tell your assistant where they need to be lighting. So they could be 90 degrees lighting from the side, or they could be right by you lighting from above, but getting the perfect light on your subject is going to be very difficult. If you bounce light into the ceiling, everybody's going to look great because you're going to have a huge light source lighting an entire area, and then you can kind of pick off the people that are doing something interesting and capture really great photos. But if you're trying to light a couple that's right next to the bride and groom, your assistant might face the light towards the bride and groom and they look great, but the subject that you're trying to photograph might be dark. So using off-camera directional light can produce really cool results, but it's going to be a little trickier to get the perfect light on every single subject every time you take a photograph. I'd also say the final thing that makes this kind of difficult is you're going to have your assistant walking around with you, and at a reception that can be really intrusive. If it's a large wedding, it's probably not that big of a deal, but if it's a smaller, more intimate wedding, this might not be the setup that you want to use. Now keep in mind, this setup is really good for those situations where your subject is moving around or you're taking pictures of individual people in a large group. But if you know exactly where your subject's going to be for a long time, say maybe the cake cutting, you can do this same setup with the light on a light stand, and you can just position that near you, and if your subjects aren't moving, you can get really nice directional off-camera light without having to use an assistant. Here are a few examples from the last wedding that I shot, and because I'm using directional flash on my subjects only, I'm able to burn in the ambient light that's caused from the DJs in the background. So you can see how moody these shots are, and when you compare them to a shot like this that my assistant took where he was just bounce flashing, you can see the ambient light in the background is almost completely gone. And the image still looks great, but it just has a lot less mood and it looks a lot less like it actually did when we were there at the reception. So keep in mind, there's really no correct way to light a reception. You might find that you like the moody images and that might be the direction you'd like to go towards. You may find that you like really bright images where the whole reception hall is lit up, and that's the technique that you go to. But I think it's really important that you know how to do several different lighting setups, because eventually you're going to find yourself in a reception hall where one lighting setup may not work, but another technique that you know is going to be perfect.
So guys, I hope that helps explain a little bit more about how we light our receptions. Obviously, you're going to choose your favorite way depending on what's easiest for you or maybe what creates the images that you like the most. But keep in mind, even though you will pick your favorite and you will do the same thing over and over and over again, there will be those receptions that come around that take place in a barn that has red ceilings and red walls and you're not going to be able to bounce. Or you're going to shoot one of those receptions that takes place outside and doesn't have any sort of walls or ceilings to bounce off of. And you're going to have a backup plan. You're going to have to know how to light your subjects in any situation to create the best images possible.
Two of the hardest images that I find to take at the reception are the garter toss and the bouquet toss. You might find that you only take this image 50% of the time. It's a tradition that is in and out of season at times, but you're going to need to know how to pull off a really great garter toss and a really good bouquet toss. For years, I used to just bounce light into the ceiling and just kind of capture the whole entire reception hall as, you know, the bride threw the flowers behind her, or maybe the groom shot the garter towards the groomsmen. And this worked really well, but then I started realizing there were so many options to produce much more dramatic photos during this time. So because typically you have the groom or the bride close to you, and then you have a group of single guys or single girls in the background, you really have the chance to light two separate fields. The setup that I'm using for both of these photographs is pretty much the same. I'm using an on-camera flash that I then either bounce straight up or maybe I bounce slightly behind me so that I'm hitting a white wall, and that's gonna light up the bride or the groom that's directly in front of the camera. And then I'm using other lights on light stands to light the people in the background. If I just did bounce flash, in a lot of situations the crowd would go really dark because they're so far away. So in order to light both the bride and groom and the group of people, you're probably going to need to use both bounce flash and some kind of off-camera light on a light stand. Your speed light setting is probably going to be around 1/32 power or less, and usually on the camera I'm shooting at ISO 1600 at 2.8. So your speed light's going to be very low in power because your ISO is so high. And because your speed light is a direct light source, your power doesn't have to be that high to still be effective. The first part of the garter toss is going to be the bride sitting down, and then the groom is going to go up under her dress and pull the garter off her leg. And because they're going to be sitting, they're going to be in a very predictable environment, which allows you to put lights in positions that's going to be the most flattering for this photograph. Usually I will put a speed light on a stand and then put that towards the bride's back, so it's getting a nice kicker light on the side of her. And then when the groom goes in to take off the garter, you have bounce flash lighting them from the ceiling, but then you have a kicker either behind them or off to the side that's just adding kind of a rim light, which makes this shot look really dramatic. Once the groom's taken the garter off of the bride, he's typically gonna walk towards you and face the camera, and then he's gonna throw the garter behind him into the group of single groomsmen. And what I usually do is I just then turn the speed light that's on the light stand towards the group of guys, and that's gonna become the key light for them. And then I'm gonna bounce light into the ceiling so that I can still light the groom. And it produces really dramatic results. It also allows you to get light on all of your subjects. And the reason I think this lighting setup works really well is because there's so much action going on in these photographs that by lighting the two different groups separately, you're able to allow the viewer to see everything going on during this event. I pretty much use this exact same lighting setup for the bouquet toss. It's already set up because they just did the garter, and the bride is gonna be, again, facing the camera with all of her bridesmaids in the background. And I can light the bridesmaids so when they jump up to catch the bouquet, they're lit well, and then the bounce flash from my camera is gonna light the bride really well. Of course, you can also vary this up a little bit. You can put the kicker light behind the group of people so that you're kind of having a rim light coming down on them, and it backlights the bouquet, and it also backlights all the girls. You could put it off to the side so that you have a kicker light kind of on the whole group. You could even set up multiple lights bouncing into the ceiling so that you have nice soft light lighting up the entire place. If you take time to position your lights behind people, then you're gonna get kind of a rim light that's gonna help separate everyone from the background. But you can also shoot towards the lights, and that's gonna produce sort of a lens flare look, which can look really atmospheric as well. So your photographs can look very different depending on where exactly you place the flashes and which direction you're shooting towards. The thing you really want to remember with this setup is if you're working with assistants who are also going to be photographing this event, you probably want to have lights for each camera that you're using. If two of you are trying to use the same kicker light, it's going to be inevitable that when you take the picture, the flash doesn't fire for your assistant, or when your assistant takes a picture, you've missed the shot because it didn't refresh for you. So a lot of times I'll set up one or two lights depending on how many photographers that I have shooting this event. The other big skill that you're really gonna have to master when you're taking these photographs is just waiting for the peak moment. Chances are you're only going to be able to take one or two shots while the flower is up in the air. So it's really important to look through the viewfinder and then just wait for that peak moment before you hit the trigger. If you take an image a little bit too early, the next shot's probably gonna be a little too late. So once you have your lighting set up and you've tested that with a couple frames, it's really important just to wait and capture the peak moment because that's gonna be the shot that you wanna deliver to your clients. So this setup is my go-to shot. I do this every time that I have to shoot a garter or bouquet toss. And I think if you just take 2 minutes to prepare for it, you can produce really good photos at the reception of this event. One of the most important detail shots you're gonna have to photograph at every wedding is the cake. And I like to photograph the cake during the reception when everyone is eating. And I've come up with a very simple 2-light setup that really makes this process quick and easy. Unless you've already been married, you probably don't always quite grasp the significance of a lot of the detail and the planning that's gone into a wedding. And what I've found is the cake is one of the most important details that they've picked out. I mean, a lot of times these cakes cost as much as the fee that I charge to shoot a wedding. So you really want to capture it in a really interesting way that's gonna make the cake look the way they dreamed of it when they first hired the cake builder. And also, it's a great way for you to send images to the person who designed the cake and they can refer more business back to you. So don't take any of these detail shots lightly. Always try to produce the best looking image. And in my case, I like to go for a very clean studio look. If there's enough room in the reception hall, I will usually shoot with the telephoto lens, usually a 70 to 200, and this allows me to remove any distracting elements so all of your attention goes straight to the cake. I also like using telephoto because you can blur the background when shooting wide open. So if you're at 2.8, it's super useful, especially if there's distracting elements in the background. Also, if there's any interesting lighting behind the cake, you can really compress the background and add colorful specular highlights into your cake images, which is always really cool. So try shooting the cake from a couple different angles and see which one's going to be the most interesting. I often find that if I crouch down and shoot from a lower angle, it makes the cake look really impressive and pretty epic. In this example here, I'm showing you an image that one of my assistants took, and you can see how it changes from this shot to the shot that I take from a slightly lower angle, and the image just has a lot more weight to it. One thing to really be mindful of when you're composing your cake shot images is what's lying in the background. Simply changing the camera angle a little bit can make a huge difference, and you can change the background completely just by moving your camera a couple feet. The main lighting setup that I use is a speed light on camera bouncing straight up into the ceiling or off at an angle, and then I also use a second off-camera speed light inside a flash disc. And what this does, this setup allows my assistant to add soft directional light to the side of the cake, while my on-camera flash gives the overall scene a correct exposure. If you want to add even more drama to your lighting, you can easily turn the on-camera flash off and use only the remote speed light. At most weddings, I'll try to do a combination of both lighting schemes so that I have the choice when I get back to the editing process. Having an off-camera speed light inside the flash disc works really well for a lot of detail shots, and it's especially useful when shooting outside. A lot of the time you're not going to have a ceiling to bounce light off of at all, and the only option you have is a one light setup. Of course, if the cake is lit really well with natural light, you can also use that, but it's nice to have a lot of options so that if you get in a bind, you have a couple lighting tricks that you can pull out of your back pocket. A lot of these detail shots that we're going to talk about throughout this DVD, we really approach them like a product shot or even like you're lighting a person. And so when I talk about a light being on camera bouncing into the ceiling, you might think of that as your key light or maybe as a fill light, and then your off-camera light really becomes the kicker or rim light. So this just adds a lot of dimension to your photographs, and it's really going to help separate your images from the other photographers who are just going to direct flash or perhaps bounce a light into the ceiling. So obviously I can't tell you every setting that I use for each one of these images because you're going to find that really depends on the environment that you're shooting. But basically I start with the ambient light. I'm shooting at f2.8, and maybe you set your ISO to ISO 1000 and you get an exposure that's usually a little dark, but it has some ambient element to it. And then you're going to set your key light, which is your on-camera flash, to maybe a 4th power, and that's going to bounce into the ceiling and just add a little extra dimension to the photograph. It's really going to light the front of the cake. And then you're going to add the final light, which would be your kicker light. And since that's very directional, you're probably going to power that down significantly. But using ambient light, your key bounce light, and your off-camera light, you're going to be able to produce really dramatic photos that look unlike anything that people are taking at the wedding. And there's also a lot of times where the flash on your camera can just be set to TTL, and it's going to produce a really standard exposure, which when added with the off-camera kicker light really produces great results as well. So you can set things manually, or if you like doing the TTL thing with Pocket Wizards, you can do that as well. As professionals, I think it's really important that we remember that every image that we take has to really stand out from all of the other images that a couple's guests are going to be taking. And you better believe that everyone's going to take a picture of the cake. So I think it's really important to take different angles with different focal lengths, different lighting setups, and really mix it up so that you can produce the best image that's going to stand out from everybody else's shot. So that's how I like to shoot my cake shots. I really like to go towards the telephoto spectrum, but when you're getting started, you may want to shoot wide angle. You may want to try a bunch of different things to figure out what that one go-to shot is for you. Because at the end of the day, you want a shot that you know is going to work 95% of the time, that you can quickly reproduce at every wedding, and you can get in there, get out, knock the shot out. And by shooting a lot of different angles and different lighting setups, you can figure out what that shot is for you. I think too, as photographers, we always want to approach our weddings and do something unique and creative, and we get in this mindset of just trying something new, and I totally encourage everyone to do that. But I think it's important to remember that these shots that you've done day in and day out at every single wedding are still very new and unique to your clients. They've never seen an image like this. So find that go-to shot that really works well for you, and keep in the back of your mind that your clients haven't seen every wedding you've shot. For them, that one shot of the cake is going to be completely unique, and it's going to really stand out in their wedding album. So one shot that you have to do at every single wedding, or at least one shot that I like to do at every single wedding, is the ring shots. And there's a lot of different ways that you could do ring shots, but I'm going to show you how I do them. I actually use a macro 60mm lens so that I can get really close and do true macro shots with these. And basically, you can use anything that you find around the reception to place the rings on, but one shot I always go to that's quick and easy and I know is going to work is putting the rings inside the bride's bouquet of flowers. In most cases, I really can't spend more than a minute or two on these shots, and the way I treat it is kind of like a product shot, and you could sit here with a bunch of bounce cards and multiple flashes and get amazing shots, but it's probably gonna take a lot longer than the time that I have. So this is really quick and easy. It takes 60 seconds. I'm gonna show you how I do it. So let's talk about the camera settings real quick. I almost set this exactly the same every time. So I'm gonna go to ISO 400, and then I usually get the smallest aperture that my macro lens allows me, which it varies between f32 and maybe f51. And then I'm gonna set my shutter speed to the sync speed at 250 so that the ambient light is really negligible in these shots. And for lighting, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a simple speed light inside one of the f-stopper's flash discs. And by putting the speed light inside a flash disc, I can get the light really close and it's gonna appear very large. And this does two things. It's gonna allow the light to be relatively soft, but it's also going to be large enough to where the rings are gonna have a lot of specular highlights and the diamond's really gonna shine. So basically, we're gonna put these rings inside the flowers, and figuring out how to position them correctly is kind of a skill in and of itself. That looks pretty good. And once you have the rings positioned, we're gonna take a test shot to make sure the settings look pretty good. So we're gonna get really close here. And it looks pretty good. Sometimes with white flowers, you might have to dial the speed light down a little bit, or you can bump your ISO down a little bit since I'm at 400. But right now it looks perfect. So basically I'm gonna have Lauren move the light around so that she can light it in different ways, because I never quite know what position is gonna produce the best photo. And a lot of this is just luck. I'm gonna try to get 10 or 12 images and one of those is gonna be perfect, and then I'm done and I can move on. So you can see here, I'm just taking about 10 shots, and most of these shots do not look that good because the light's not hitting the rings perfectly. But all of a sudden you come across a shot like this where it's great. The ring really shines and the flowers look really awesome. So it's really that simple. I just move the light around for about 10 shots, and then you're gonna get one like this. And I can throw this into Photoshop and remove some of the dust. I can also tweak the colors a little bit, and I can also brighten up the ring if I really wanted to. These are probably the only shots that I Photoshop every time because there is dust when you're shooting at f51. But because this is a macro shot and it just looks so unlike anything the bride's seen before, she's gonna be really impressed that her rings look so awesome. Keep in mind, you don't have to use the flowers. I use the flowers every time because I know they work and they look really good with a macro lens. But we have a nice reflective table here, so a lot of times you can just find steel or wood or really anything that's just around the reception and use that as your surface. And if I have Lauren light right above this, we can produce really cool ring shots that are not using the flowers. And you can see here, I mean, just depending on the polished surface and where the light is, you're gonna get different reflections. But I've seen photographers add water to this. Maybe they've used the programs that have the bride and groom's name on them or the wedding date. You can really get as creative as you want, but the whole idea is to have a system like this in place so that you can shoot really quickly, because I have to get back into the reception to shoot dancing. So at every single wedding, I try to be creative and come up with some new take on the ring shots, but I have to always go back to the flowers because it's my go-to shot and I know that it's gonna work. And in the back of my mind, I know the bride and groom have never seen photos like this, even though I do it day in and day out. So you might want to experiment with different surfaces and different flowers and find a shot that really works for you. But the whole idea is to come up with a system that's quick and easy so that you can knock this out in 60 seconds.
So we just finished up shooting this wedding, and one common shot that you're gonna shoot a lot is the sparkler departure shot. And I'm doing something pretty much for every single sparkler shot that's the exact same setup. I'm using a bare bulb flash. This is the only time that I direct flash, but I'm gelling it red, and then I am white balancing for this. So it doesn't look red on my subjects. Everything looks perfect. And in fact, this color coming out of this flash is very similar to the color of the sparklers themselves. So instead of having like white light on your subjects and then really orange sparklers, now everything is a little bit more even. And then I'm also taking an SB800, putting it on a light stand connected to a Pocket Wizard, and setting it at 1/16 power and putting it behind them. So as they're walking, the flash in the background is also firing. And because I'm white balanced for this red light, the flash in the back looks blue. And it lights up the sparkler smoke, and it just creates this really cool, moody image, which is much better than just shooting direct flash without any lights in the background. Keep in mind that you could do this for any type of departure. You could do it for bubbles, you could do it for flower petals, it really doesn't matter. I think it's really nice having a light coming from behind your subjects to separate them from the dark background. One thing that I always ask my couples to do right before they walk through everybody is say, once you get to the middle, could you give me one kiss right there? So that I know that they're going to stop and they're going to kiss, and that's like my go-to image that I've always got, just in case they want to run through. They know to stop for a second, and I can definitely get a shot.
So you've just seen how Lee uses a speed light on a light stand to light his departure shots, and I think that's a really easy way to do it. But I've actually come up with a more interesting, simple way to do this, where I can actually use the speed light on my assistant's camera so that I can trigger his on-camera flash and get the rim look, while he's able to trigger my on-camera flash to also achieve the same looking image. And the beauty of this is I can shoot from the front and get a nice shot of the bride and groom walking towards me and have a kicker light behind them, while my assistant can shoot from behind them and get a shot of them leaving with the same kicker look. So let me describe this setup as simply as I can, because it is kind of a complicated technical arrangement that I have here. Basically what I have is two cameras with two on-camera flashes pointed forward, and both cameras with this speed light on top have Pocket Wizards plugged into the side. And basically you can set the flash on your camera either to manual or TTL. I like to use TTL because the distance between my flash and the couple is going to be changing as they're walking out and departing from the venue. So when I take a picture, my camera is going to expose the couple correctly, but then it's also going to fire my assistant's on-camera flash and give them that rim look. And the opposite is true for my assistant. When he takes a picture, it's going to expose correctly for the couple, although he's going to be facing the backside of them, but then my flash is going to fire, giving him the rim look. So essentially, both my assistant and I can get the same looking images from two different angles, and we're not having to set up light stands, and we can kind of use our own flashes on our cameras to really produce interesting images that would be very difficult to do as the couple is walking out and departing. So as I said before, you can either set your on-camera flashes into manual or into TTL. And if you were to set them both to manual, you want both flashes to be at the same power. So maybe you set them at 30-second power. But what I've learned is if you set them both to TTL, then when I take a picture, my flash is going to fire appropriately, but then the backlight is going to be at around 1/16 power, even though it's set to TTL. And the advantage of this is now I can get correct exposure on my end while having a constant backlight, but then when my assistant takes a photo, his flash is going to be in TTL, with mine firing at roughly about 1/16 power. So I find that it's a little bit easier to get a correct exposure with the flashes faced forward in TTL mode, but if you set them to manual, you really need to do a couple quick tests to make sure that the power is correctly exposing the subject at a very specific distance. So you're probably wondering, how do I take this photograph without getting my assistant in the frame? And we've really trained ourselves to be right in front of the couple or right behind the couple, so that when I take a photograph, my assistant's speed light is behind them and he's being hidden by the couple themselves. And when he takes a photograph, the same is true with me. I'm hidden behind the couple. And on that chance that you do catch your assistant in the background, I don't really think it's a big deal for this type of shot because there's so many activities going around. People are taking pictures, they're throwing rice or blowing bubbles, or maybe they have sparklers out, that it just kind of adds to the excitement by seeing the photographer in the background. Or if your photographer assistant is far enough back, because the light is coming from them, a lot of times they're cast into shadow anyway. So you don't have to have this whole thing down perfectly, but I would suggest testing this out because it is kind of complicated and you definitely don't want this to go wrong during a real wedding. I actually prefer this method over Lee's method because unlike Lee's where he has a stationary speed light on a light stand, I have a moving light. It's my assistant. So as the couple's coming down and getting further away from the light source that Lee would have on a stick, my light's moving with the couple. So it makes it a lot easier to get perfect lighting, and it also makes it easier to get those shots when you've gotten really far away from your light source. The way this setup really works is it's all based on the Pocket Wizard being able to trigger the flash directly by having a PC sync cord into the flash. And I know a lot of the cheaper flashes don't have a PC sync cord at all. So this setup's not going to work with the lower model flashes. You really have to have a flash that has the input here. But we've also noticed that some of the new flashes like the SB910, the flash itself acts completely differently when it's mounted onto a camera. It loses all ability to have a signal go into the flash unit while it's on a camera. So before you do this setup at your next wedding, you really need to test out the complete system because what I've learned is every camera and every flash is going to respond a little bit differently. I'm using Nikon's older SB800 and this system works perfectly for that. I have friends that have the Canon 580EX2s and they can do the same setup as well. So if you have Canon, test this out, you should be good to go. If you have Nikon, you might have to actually have the older SB800s until Nikon updates the firmware to allow this to happen on the newest flashes. As Lee showed in his setup earlier, it's really a good idea to gel your on-camera flash for sparkler shots because now you're able to balance the ambient light with your flashlight and it's gonna look a lot more natural. But if you're shooting something like rice or flowers or bubbles where there's no light source, you really don't have to gel your flash anymore because you can white balance everything correctly. So here are a few examples of some of my favorite photographs I've taken over the years, and if you copy this lighting setup, I have no doubt that you can produce photographs that look just as good. So we're going to change gears a little bit now and talk about the actual business of becoming a photographer. And I think it's so easy for anybody to go out and buy a camera and start taking pictures, but it can be completely frustrating and complicated to start your own photography business legally in your own state or country. Now, Lee and I, we both have a CPA who is a bookkeeper, and then we also have a CPA who is a tax accountant. And they both together help us figure out exactly how to run our business and also how to file our tax return at the end of the year. Now, depending on your CPA, you may actually pay up to $300 an hour just to get the information that you need to know to start your business and also to file your yearly tax returns. So we're gonna sit down with Kristen DeGette. She's a CPA who does both Lee and my own bookkeeping for our photography businesses. And what I love about Kristen, she's super personable. She represents a lot of photographers here in Charleston, and she has personal relationships with people in the South Carolina Department of Revenue. She's gonna walk us through step by step of what you need to do to start your own business. If you watch this section and even take notes, I have no doubt that at the end of this, you're gonna be much more prepared to go to these offices and apply for all of the documents that you need so that you can start your business quickly and easily. I think you're gonna find this information extremely useful and incredibly valuable. So today we're here with Kristen DeGette. She is our personal bookkeeper, and she does everything for Lee Morris Photography and Patrick Hall Photography, as well as F-Stoppers. So we've known each other for how long now? 6, 7 years?
Has it been that long?
I think it has. She's been here from the beginning, and she's been a huge lifesaver to us. We had so many questions when we first started our business that I don't know if I would know what I'm doing at all without you. So we're really happy to have her here. She's going to answer a couple questions that we have and hopefully make this process really easy for you guys, since starting a business can be kind of intimidating. So let's start from the very basics. You are a bookkeeper, and a lot of people might say, oh, well, I need to hire a CPA. Can you kind of explain the differences between a bookkeeper and a CPA and what you do and what they do?
Yeah, the CPA is ethically and professionally bound to certain rules. So a CPA can only sign off on compilations, reviews, audits, certain documents that are very important to businesses, versus a bookkeeper who isn't allowed to sign their name to any documents. They don't have to follow ethics rules. They're pretty much just a small business without the license of a CPA. Would I recommend a bookkeeper versus a CPA? I would recommend a CPA, only because they are bound to these rules and these obligations. And if you had a complaint against a bookkeeper versus a complaint against a CPA, you could take it up with your state's board and complain, and their license could effectively be taken away. So there's a card to hold, I would say.
And I would assume having a bookkeeper is still going to be a huge asset, because
Absolutely.
You know way more details I know than my CPA, but together you guys are able to work in a way that just everything, every T's crossed, every I's dotted, you have everything down.
Yeah, and I think the most confusion is caused because there's two different types of CPAs. There's your tax CPA, who does tax returns primarily, and there's a general ledger CPA, which is what I am, which is the debits, the credits, the profit and loss, the balance sheet, the nuts and bolts of your day-to-day accounting. And so I'm not a tax accountant, but I'm a general ledger accountant. So I prepare the financials and pass them off to those professionals who provide the tax returns and do that.
But you still, I know talking to you through the years, you know a lot of the ins and outs of what goes into each.
Yes, I mean,
field.
I deal with these tax accountants every day. I ask the questions that maybe I don't know the answer to, or I get the answer from my client. So I think having somebody there to call is the bottom line, is that you need somebody that you trust and is reliable, will pick up the phone, will not charge you an arm and a leg, and who can get you the answers to your question.
And one reason Lee and I wanted to have you here for this conversation was you've really helped a lot of photographers here in the Charleston market. So you've been a huge asset here in Charleston as well as South Carolina, but you've also been through an audit, right? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've been through a few audits, and they can be very intimidating. So I guess the first thing I would want to tell your viewers is that if you do get a proposed assessment or you get an audit letter, that that's something that you really can't do on your own. You really need professional help, whether it's a CPA on the tax side or on the general ledger side, someone who's been through it, someone who is familiar with your state's laws, the regulations, somebody who may have an in the Department of Revenue, which is, I've got a lot of good friends in the Department of Revenue, which has really helped out in audit times. But if you do get one of those letters, don't hesitate, call somebody. Ask your fellow photographers who they trust, who they would use. I mean, I think that's where a good networking comes in, and you can find out who you can trust.
Well, hopefully we can all avoid audits or at least be prepared
Yes.
when they come. So let's start from the very beginning.
Okay.
I think when I first came to you, I might have been doing photography for 6 months, and I said, hey, I know I need to get everything in order.
Right.
Walk me through the steps of what I need to do. What would be the first thing a photographer should probably do when they're starting their business?
Well, you should figure out how you want to be legally formed. Do you want to stay a sole proprietor, which runs everything through your own personal social security number, or do you want to become an LLC or an S corp or a C corp, one of those other entities? So you first need to determine how you want to be formed.
Is there something, I think maybe I did sole proprietorship for a year or so, but I
Right.
think I went straight to an LLC. Is that the most common form
Most
of
common.
structure?
Usually, when you want to form an LLC, correlates with how many assets you have. If you're just renting and you're living check to check and you're real small, you're still trying to build your business, sole proprietor is absolutely fine. You don't have to spend the money to become an LLC. I would recommend becoming an LLC when you have maybe a house and if you're married and you got children and there's assets that could potentially be jeopardized if you were to get
Was
sued.
there a difference, like with an LLC costs $300 or something to?
LLC costs in the state of South Carolina $110 filing fee, and then usually if you go see a lawyer, you could pay between $250 and $1,500.
Okay, so it's still not a lot of money to go ahead and set up an LLC.
It's not a lot of money, and I mean I charge my clients very minimal to do the paperwork. What gets a little bit more costly is if you have multi-members and different stock issues going on. So it can get more complicated, but generally speaking, there's really no excuse why you shouldn't be able to form an LLC in your state. It's worth the peace of mind that if you were to get sued, that they couldn't come after your personal assets.
So when you're going to apply for this LLC, I can't even remember what I did. I think I hired an attorney or a CPA to do the paperwork for me. What does somebody need to do to actually get that legal document going? Because it does constitute what's going to happen going forward. I mean, you're going to be legally bound by this declaration. So
Correct. And I would hire somebody. I would recommend hiring somebody to do that for you. It shouldn't cost an arm and a leg. You can, literally all you would need to do is sign your name, and then you should be able to get your paperwork from the state, assuming you hire somebody to do it. So when you go and you're filling out this paperwork, or you're hiring someone to fill out this paperwork, a lawyer is an option, a CPA is an option. Some tax accountant CPAs may be able to handle it, depending on what their firm handles, but there's a lot of options for you, and price it out, get estimates. You shouldn't have to pay too much for that paperwork.
So if you go the route like I think I did and you get the LLC, what are the benefits that you would have being that classification?
Okay, well there's 3 different classifications of LLC, so it's really important to know which LLC you are, first of all, which the person who helps you figure out what you want to be, you will know what you are. But the benefits of an LLC is that if you were to get sued, that your personal assets could not be come after by anybody who's suing you. So they would just be able to attack your
Photography business.
Your business
Right.
assets, not your personal assets, which is very important and worth the $110 filing fee.
Sure.
10 times over.
So you want to start a photography business. What is the very first thing that you need to do to get your business rolling?
Okay, well, if you do not want to be a sole proprietor and you want to kind of move into an LLC status, you need to go get your EIN with the IRS. That can simply be done by going online, answering a few questions, and they can actually electronically give you that EIN number right there over the computer.
And what is an EIN number?
It's an employer identification number, so it's like your social security number for your business. It basically disassociates your personal social security number from your actual business that you're running.
Okay.
So if you fill out any forms like a W-9, if your customers ask you to fill out a W-9, it says that you're a legal citizen, you're going to pay taxes, you would put in your business EIN rather than your social security number. It replaces your social security number.
Okay.
Now, if you're still sole proprietor, you would still be using that social security number. You wouldn't have necessarily an EIN. You could get one, but it's not necessary.
Sure.
Correct?
And then if I recall correctly, this was so long ago, you need that EIN number to then go to a bank to open up a business checking account.
Yes, and the importance of a business checking account and not keeping your business expenses muddled in with your personal is if you get audited, let's say your business gets audited, you then, if you have personal transactions in your business account, or if you have business transactions in your personal account and one of them get audited, you're really opening up an entire scope for them to look at. When you get audited, you want to give them as little amount of information. You want to answer the questions. You don't want to have them looking at everything. For example, one of my clients went through an audit, and they were buying personal items, running it through their business account, and the personal items were bought out of state, so they were bought tax-free, tax-exempt. Well, those then became subject to the audit, and we had to pay sales and use tax because they had muddled everything together in the same account. So it's very important that you separate your business from your personal expenses.
Okay. So we're going to get to sales and use tax a little bit later.
Okay.
But the important thing to do is set up a business checking account, and then you can have all of your income go into that account, all your expenses go out, and then even the first year, if you don't get around to hiring a CPA or bookkeeper, which a lot of people might do that first year, it's still going to make life a lot easier because everything's bundled into one account.
Correct. And at the end of the year, a lot of times photographers in the very beginning, they don't have somebody handling their books. So at the end of the year, come April 15th, they're trying to get all their ducks in a row for their tax account or whoever's going to prepare their tax return.
They're looking at receipts and trying to figure out.
Yeah, and they don't not know what's deductible, and I think that's where the value of a bookkeeper, an accountant, or CPA would come in that we know what can be deducted, and you're not guessing. At the end of the day, if you are going to do it yourself, I would say put everything on the spreadsheet that you give to your tax accountant and let them determine what's deductible, but not giving them the information is only going to hurt you. I would rather give them too much information, let them determine what they want to deduct for your taxes.
So now that you have the EIN number, you have the LLC classification, and you've gone to your bank and you've opened a checking account, correct? And you probably are going to get some kind of debit card or credit card that you can with that business. You're now able to write all your expenses and deposit your money in there. What is the next step a photographer probably needs to do moving forward?
Well, you should check with your local town or municipality to find out if there's any business license requirements. That's an annual license that you pay where your money is received. So if you have a P.O. box in Hanahan or some other city, you need to have your business license in the town that you receive your money from your customers. It's very, very important. Some towns don't have requirements. They have the county has the county holds the licenses and issues the licenses, so you would have to go there to apply. But find out either from other photographers or other videographers what in your town, what are the requirements, and make sure you do that. Because if you get caught without a business license, it could be fines and penalties that you don't want to have.
And when you first apply for this business license, I think they always ask you what is the estimated amount of money you're going to make that first year. What are we talking? Are we talking $20? Are we talking $3,000? What is, on an average business, especially getting started, what would somebody expect to pay for a business license?
They're going to ask you your estimated gross receipts. And I always tell people, you don't want to grossly underestimate that number, but you don't want to grossly overestimate it. So if you think you're going to come out making $15,000 this year, tell them $15,000. At the end of the day, that number is going to get trued up next year when you renew that license. They're going to ask for the tax return to prove what you made the prior year, and they're going to true that number up anyway, which means adjust what you owe. So either way, it really doesn't matter. An average business license around here is $60 to $80 per town. So Mount Pleasant, $60. If you go out to Seabrook, it's another $60. You can see that can get expensive. You really are only required to have a business license where you receive your money, okay? So
let's talk about that a little bit. So you have an office in your town. You are in New York City,
right?
But you also do business, all over New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Do you need a business license everywhere you're doing work? Because here in Charleston, there are municipalities that are saying you need a business license to shoot on this beach. And I think there's been a lot of confusion, at least here, about what business licenses do you need? What is the actual rules that you need to do here?
Well, it's funny because I had Charleston County Business License Division come out and talk at a recent photographer lunch, And the rules are that you are required to have a business license where you take money from your clients. So if you go out to a photo shoot in Mount Pleasant or in Hanahan and you take money there, technically you're supposed to have a business license there. So you should only take your money in one central location would be my first advice.
And are you talking physical money? If somebody mails me a check and we do a photo shoot in a week, is that now local money in the town where my office is, or?
That's where you should have your business license, is where you receive your money. If it's in an office, in offices in Charleston, then have a Charleston County license. If your P.O. box is in Hanahan, you need to have a business license in Hanahan. So the rule is wherever you receive your money is where you need to have a business license. However, there are municipalities such as Kiowa, Seabrook, that won't even let you walk onto the property to shoot a wedding without a business license in that municipality. So then it gets muddled, and you can't have a business license in every town that you shoot in. That you would literally go broke. So what I recommend is that you talk to your fellow photographers and find out where and which municipalities they're asking for proof and a business license, and know that in advance so that when you're booking these clients, you can actually pass that cost onto your client, built into the package that you're selling them, knowing that I'm going to have to go out and get an $80 business license at Kiowa. So knowledge is power. You want to know in advance where in your local state the business licenses are going to be required to be shown before you shoot a wedding. At the end of the day, when you get audited, all your business licenses, let's say during the year you got 3, for whatever reason you get one where you live, where you collect your money, and 2 others where you were shooting a wedding and they required it. At the end of the day, all 3 of those gross receipt numbers that you used on the application to get those business licenses needs to tie to your tax return gross receipts. So if you have $100,000 in gross receipts that you reported on your tax return, all 3 gross receipts from all 3 different business licenses that you have need to total up to that $100,000.
Now, what if you shoot destination weddings and you are literally in a different state, maybe even a different country? You can't possibly have that work out for you. So do you have one primary residence for your business, and then you're taking money probably months in advance, like a lot of photographers do, and then you're just traveling and shooting weddings, in these destination spots? Is it that big of a deal at that point, or is somebody going to approach you on the beach in Jamaica and say, hey, where's your business license? What does somebody who wants to become kind of a destination photographer, or maybe they're in a state that's bordered by a ton of other states around them, need to do in terms of this? I mean, can you just get one in your state, your city, and be good? Or is this going to be an issue that they really need to address as they start shooting more abroad?
I think you really need to do your research before you travel to whatever location this is. I can't certainly speak for everywhere, but I would definitely have a copy of your business license, where your business is located, where your nexus is, and then do your research before you go, because you don't know, and you don't want to be embarrassed in front of your customers and clients that you don't have what you need. So I would recommend doing your research before you go to these destination locations and find out from other photographers in the area what is required.
So I know personally, shooting a lot of weddings in other states and even in other countries, I've found that it's just easier to go, not under the radar, but not bring attention to yourself. I know we've shot a lot of weddings overseas, and the worst thing you can do, especially going through customs, is to write occupation photographer, because the second you get up to that desk, they're going to ask for visas, and they're going to ask for a lot more information to make sure that you have the proper requirements to work in that country. And if you're only there for a tiny little job, say you're shooting one wedding for a day, it can just be a big hassle to have all that paperwork and declare that. Sometimes it's easier just to go in as a hobbyist. And, if you're not doing this every single weekend, you probably are going to be fine. If you're going to be shooting destination weddings your whole career, every week, you probably, like you said, want to investigate and make sure that you have the proper business licenses and visas in the countries that you are working in.
Absolutely.
So let's recap real quick. We have gotten the EIN number. We have gotten the LLC. We've opened the bank account for your business. We've gotten any and all business licenses in the areas that we're working out of. Is there anything else that you need to get before you're actually in business and doing everything correctly in a legal manner?
Yes, you need to, in the state of South Carolina, and this varies from state to state, but if your state has a sales tax, then you need to get what's called a retail license with your state. In my state, our state, it's $50 fee. It's a one-time fee. Once you have that license, it basically means that you are selling a product, tangible products to customers, to end users, and you need to pay a tax on that. That's called a sales tax. Sales and use tax are combined on the return that is filed, and the return is filed every month. So you apply for this retail license, pay $50 into the state of South Carolina, you get this license, and in the state of South Carolina, this obligates you every month to file a sales and use tax return. It's due on the 20th of the month if you have 0 sales. So let's say you took 3 months off, you had a family emergency, you did nothing. You bought nothing, you received no money, you booked no weddings. You still are obligated to file a sales and use tax return on the 20th of the month, whether you have 0 sales or thousands of dollars of sales.
And I think when I first found this out, that was reason enough to hire a CPA because just having to do something so scheduled every single month
Right.
Was just something I didn't want to have to worry about, and I knew that I had a professional dealing with it. So we have now the retail license, and I know this opens up a can of worms about taxes, and we're going to address a lot about taxes because I know that's what a lot of photographers are worried about the most and most concerned about. We're going to get to that in a minute. Is there any other final thing that a photographer should worry about that first year in getting their business declared?
Well, there's certainly some things I would recommend. When you do get that business license with the town or the municipality that you live in, ask the question, if you work out of your home, if there's any home occupancy application that you need to fill out. Is there, anything else that town may require that, perhaps you and I aren't familiar with here in South Carolina? Another thing I would definitely recommend is looking into insurance for your equipment. If you're traveling, talk to an insurance agent who is professional and knowledgeable about what kind of insurance you should have to protect your assets in the business should somebody trip over your extension cord or, trip over your tripod.
Well, I know too, if you want to rent gear, a lot of times rental
Right.
companies might require that you have some kind of insurance policy
Right.
too. So if you're in a big city and you're going to go to B&H or Adorama and rent a bunch of gear, or you're going to rent generators and stuff, you may need some kind of liability there
Insurance,
as well.
correct.
So a lot of this stuff we can do online. There might be a few things that we need to hire a CPA or an attorney to fill out for us. Where do we get the business license?
Well, it depends on each town and municipality. So I would Google and do some research online in your area and find out who handles the business license application and go and ask all the questions that you may have. There may be other requirements that they have that you and I aren't aware of, but certainly ask those people. They should be knowledgeable and they should be able to advise you.
So let's go ahead and change directions a little bit. We've got the business established. Now we're going to talk about everybody's favorite topic, which is taxes and write-offs. And I think for a lot of photographers, and especially a lot of people watching this DVD, they may not be sure that they want to actually jump headfirst into a business. This may just be a hobby, but there's a lot of advantages about making your photography hobby into a business. You can get a lot of tax write-offs, and you have a window of time to make this business profitable. So let's talk a little bit about how we're paying taxes, how we're doing write-offs, and why it really makes sense to go ahead and get a business license in an LLC, even if you're on the fence about starting a business in the first place.
Yeah, I think it's important to know that you can certainly have a job, a W-2 job is what we call it, get a W-2 from an employer and do this on the side and consider it a business and take it seriously and follow these steps that we've talked about previously. Because when you file your tax return, there are advantages in having a business and owning a business, equipment write-offs, meals, the cost of your equipment, the traveling, the miles that you've driven, the advertising that maybe you've incurred, all of that can be a write-off. There are certain distinctions between a hobby and a business, so you just want to talk to a tax accountant and become familiar and decide, if you're gonna do this, follow the steps we've talked about to become a business, and file the tax return. Make sure your tax accountant is aware of your EIN, and that everybody is aware of what you've decided and how you want to take this.
Yeah, I know when I first started my business, I was working a retail job, and it was, at a Ritz camera. I was actually in the photo business kind of already. and it was just kind of a part-time, it was a full-time job that I just was doing to have a paycheck. But as soon as I realized that photography could be a viable source for extra income, I immediately got those licenses so that I could write off all the gear that I was buying.
Right.
I found that was such a huge asset because photography equipment's so expensive.
Right.
To be able to say at the end of a year that I've bought $5,000 or $10,000 worth of equipment was so big, and I know so many photographers, they may buy that anyway. Why not go ahead and go through those hoops at the beginning, go ahead and get all of this, and you have what, 2, 3, 4 years to really start turning a profit? What is the time frame that you have to make your business a
Right.
viable
Well,
entity?
typically the rule is that there's like a 3-year window that you should be able to turn it, from red to black. So you should make a profit, show that you can actually make a living. Every tax accountant's going to answer that differently. It really depends on your situation, but really 3 years is a good rule of thumb to follow to say, okay, I've got to get this, up and running and profitable.
So for somebody who's never owned their own business, they hear a lot about tax write-offs. Can you give me a very simple explanation of what a write-off is?
Yes, a write-off is something that is ordinary and necessary in your line of business. So, for example, a photography business, ordinary and necessary would be your equipment, the traveling that it takes to get to your clients, to shoot the weddings or the videos or the portraits, meals, certain percentage of your cell phone. The business portion of your cell phone is a deduction.
I know, like advertising. Lee and I have been harping on
huge.
advertising.
Yes.
That's a huge one that you need to have.
It is. Equipment rental, computers, your desk, anything that you use in the ordinary day of what you do for a living is considered a write-off. So ordinary and necessary are the 2 criteria that the IRS will use to determine if it can be a deduction.
So basically, you have this gross income, this amount of money that you've brought in from your clients, and you're able to have write-offs that bring that amount down to a net income, and that's what you're going to be essentially taxed on.
Correct. And if you have a negative net income, you've spent more than you've taken in, then you're not going to have any tax liability at the end of the year. And for 3 years, that negative situation will allow you to get some of the equipment that maybe you could use later on, once you turn a profit. So, and another thing to remember is that net loss, let's say you did spend more than you earned, that net loss can be carried forward to the future years where you are making a lot of money, and it can offset that income in the years where you are profitable and bring your tax liability down in those future years.
I think this is so huge for photographers because those first couple years, it is so difficult to get this train rolling. And you have to put so much capital into this thing because photography equipment's expensive, advertising's expensive, and it's so nice to say that maybe you have 2 or 3 years where you have no tax liability at all for your photography business because you've invested back into your company. And I know if you're a hobbyist and you're thinking about going pro, or right off the bat you want to become a wedding photographer, this is just such a huge asset because, if you had an income from your normal day job and then you start bringing in money with photography, you're going to owe a lot of money in taxes if you're not making these write-offs.
Right. And another important thing I think to remember is if you do have a job that you have and you're treating photography as a side job, or you're trying to determine if you want to make it your full-time job, is that as an employee, you're paying into the government, into the IRS, and to the state. So you have withholding dollars that are in this bucket that are assigned to, let's say, Patrick Hall. And at the end of the year, and you've started this photography business, you've got a net loss, you actually will get that money back. You will get that withholding money back because you did draw a loss. So there's a lot of tax benefits to owning a business and having a W-2 job, a lot of benefits. And I strongly urge you to talk to me or another tax accountant about how you can handle this.
Yeah, and throughout this whole thing, Lee and I have really been encouraging photographers to keep the day job.
Yes.
Take these first couple of years and do that part-time so you're not in over your head, you're not having to make a profit to
Right.
support your lifestyle. And that gives you this nice little window where you can start to rely less on the normal day job and start making that transition into a full-time job. So I remember when I first started my photography business, I had this full-time job, and like you said, every paycheck I'm paying into withholding. So a lot of money that I thought I was making was actually going towards future taxes, which is always very helpful. But then I had this money coming in with the photography business, but I was buying so much camera equipment and these licenses and advertising that I actually wound up getting more money back at the end of the year because my photography business had a net loss, and then I'd already paid into withholding for the normal business. So I remember that first year, maybe even the second year, I got a huge check back because my photography business was in the red. And
Absolutely.
maybe by year 3, I had started to turn a profit, and eventually I had to start paying more taxes in as that business built up.
Right.
But I think it's really important for you guys to really be aware of how big of a benefit it is to go ahead and start this as a business so that you can use these tax write-offs to buy all the equipment that you're going to need to run your business in the future.
Yeah, and hire somebody who knows what write-offs you have. So hire a professional to do your taxes. Don't try to do them yourself if you're unsure.
And we're going to talk quickly about some write-offs that you can do a little bit later. I know this is a very touchy subject because CPAs deal with laws changing every year. So we're going to go through a couple big ones that is pretty common and things, maybe misconceptions that people think they can write off. But we're going to save that for a little bit later. Right now, let's go into the differences between sales tax and use tax, and this idea that you can just buy things online without paying taxes at all. Let's start though with sales tax.
Okay.
So I remember hearing 5 or 6 years ago that photography isn't necessarily a service, but we are actually selling a tangible product. And I remember that blowing my mind because I kept thinking, well, I just go and shoot pictures and then I'm delivering files, and that's not the same as manufacturing some kind of product and then selling it.
Correct.
But I know here in South Carolina and probably a lot of other states, we're viewed as a retailer. We are not a service, but we're actually manufacturing something.
Correct.
And therefore we owe taxes on that. Can you explain a little bit about how the photography deals with sales tax in their state?
Sure, and every state's going to be different, but in the state of South Carolina, the Department of Revenue considers all the labor and all the traveling and all the session fees and all the time that you spend behind your end product as part of that end product, so that you are selling, when you hand over pictures to a client, that the entire package, all your labor and time, is as a taxable transaction because you handed them something tangible in the end, and it then creates a taxable transaction.
And tangible, let's go ahead and describe that a little bit. What is a tangible product?
Tangible product is something that you actually hand to a client. There's a physical existence
So
to
with photographers, it'd be a CD or
CD,
a USB
DVD,
drive or a hard drive, an album?
an album. Anything you physically ship or hand to a client is a tangible product that is taxable. So a lot of confusion has been in the state of South Carolina is, do I have to pay taxes on my, let's say you have a $1,000 transaction and $500 of it is the session fee and $500 is actually the DVD. A lot of misconception is that they only have to pay taxes on the $500 DVD, when in essence they really need to pay the sales tax on the entire $1,000. So that's where a lot of photographers get tricked up and they end up owing and getting fined.
And I think as a general rule, I mean, is it safe to say that everything is taxable unless you are sending it electronically? If you start dividing your business into sitting fees and albums and high-res images, for the most part, you have to lump all of that together and say all of that is a tangible product, correct?
Correct. And I recommend to all of my clients that they charge sales tax up front. And you're supposed to charge sales tax on where the product is delivered. A lot of times that's hard to know where you're going to deliver in 2 years or in a year and a half. You book a wedding and it's 18 months away. Where you're going to end up shipping that product, well, you may not know. So I say charge sales tax in the forefront on everything. And then in the end, if you end up shipping that product out of state, which is a tax-free transaction, you don't have to charge and pay sales tax, then the sales tax that you did collect is just really gravy money to you. It's more profit in your pocket. So it's better to be safe than sorry.
So let's simplify this even more. You have a business. I'm now taking in clients. They're paying me money. And pretty much everything that I'm going to be supplying to them, in the most part, is a physical, tangible product. I am creating photography. So I now need to bill them sales tax in the county in which I'm going to ship this product to. And I guess here in South Carolina, there's probably 40 or 50 different counties, and I'm sure all of them have a different tax code or a tax percentage. So I need to basically build that price into what I'm charging my clients, but I need to know each one of those percentages, bill them up front, so that when that product does ship, which in wedding photography it may be, a year, it may be 18 months down the road, I'm shipping that out, but I've already collected the tax that I can then pay to the state.
Correct. So the tax that you would pay to the state would be on that sales and use tax return that I mentioned was due on the 20th of every month for anything that during that month that you're filing the return for that you delivered in state. And the sales tax rate that you would have to pay would be dependent on the sales tax rate in the county that you delivered the product to. So to be safe, I recommend to all my clients to use 8.5%. The highest percentage in South Carolina is 9%, which is Myrtle Beach. But I say just charge 8.5% because there's a lot of counties that are 6%, like Greenville County. So just to be safe, talk to somebody who knows your state and your state's laws and all the different county rates and find out what an average great rate would be if you don't know where the product's going to be delivered.
Well, this is another reason why I'm so glad I hired a professional, because can you imagine if you had to go through as a single individual who's running your business and start figuring out the taxes for everywhere and submitting the correct amount? That just seems like such a nightmare. That's, maybe for a huge corporation it would be a systematic way to do it with software or something, but to do this as a single individual just seems crazy. And like you said, if you can take the highest rate, then you're covered if anything happened. Right. And if anything, you might have made a slight percentage profit if you were shipping out to a 6% state county.
Right.
And you took 8.5%.
Right. Or you shipped out of state in which it's not a taxable transaction, and that whole 8.5% is gravy money to you.
So taking sales tax from your clients is so important. I think this might be one of the biggest things that you need to take from this whole thing, aside from paying use tax, is that you have to take sales tax as a photographer because it is not a service, it is a product. And I have a good friend of mine who I assisted for years who was a commercial photographer, and I think he went his whole career being told by his CPA that he didn't have to take sales tax, and he never charged his clients for it, he never collected any money. And that day came where he was audited, and I know he owed something like $60,000 in back taxes because they went back the full 6 or 7 years. And the thing to realize is this isn't money that you have to come up with. This is just money you're taking from your clients. But because he had so many jobs that were relatively small, he couldn't go back to one person and say, hey, by the way, you owe me 8.5% on this job. He had 8.5% due on hundreds and hundreds of jobs. So it's really horrifying to think that you could go years and years and years and be told that you don't need to take sales tax when in fact that you do. So again, this is so important. I cannot stress this enough. You need to at least be collecting the sales tax so that you can pay it to your local state and not be faced with some crazy liability years down the road.
Absolutely.
So this is all pertinent if you're going to be handing a physical disc over, if that's going to be a USB drive, if it's going to be a hard drive, if it's going to be an album, any kind of tangible product. But there is a way that you don't have to take sales tax. There's a way to decrease your liability, and that's to send it digitally, correct?
Correct.
What is a digital product or electronic product versus something that we think is digital, but it's actually on a physical media?
Right. So the distinction with the state of South Carolina is that if I hand you a flash drive, I've handed you a tangible personal product and it's taxable. But if I send those pictures maybe to a Dropbox via computer, an electronic transfer file, there's Dropbox, there's Box.net, there's tons
FTP,
of FTP. There's lots of different tools that you can use on the internet. And if you didn't physically hand your client anything or ship them anything, that transaction, that electronic transaction, is tax-free at this current time with the state of South Carolina. And it may be the same in your state, so that's why we need to look into the rules and regulations.
And I know a lot of commercial photographers have been doing this for years because they're delivering 5, 10 final images. They put them on an FTP. Your clients download those. It's a very simple thing. With weddings, if you're delivering 1,000 to 3,000 images, it can kind of be a burden to have to download 4 or 5 gigs. But a lot of people are now going this route. Media is kind of dying in a way. A lot of people now are not delivering CDs or hard drives at all. They're just letting their clients download their wedding. It's a quicker turnaround. So depending on how you deliver your product is going to dictate how you're going to take tax and how you're going to pay your local state tax.
Correct. Sales and use tax, that's right.
So we've talked a lot about sales tax, and you're also using this term use tax. And I know what use tax is because I've been paying it every month. But can you just give a simple explanation of what use tax is?
Sure. Use tax is very similar to a sales tax. A use tax is a tax on a product that otherwise was treated tax-free. So when you buy something from out of state and you bring it in state, instead of paying a sales tax, you pay a use tax. The same exact rate, so it depends on the county that you were delivered that online purchase. That's the use tax rate that you would have to pay. So if it's Charleston County, it's 8.5%. Most people neglect to pick up these items. When you go through an audit, this is critical. For the state of South Carolina, you would think that they would focus on your income and did you charge sales tax and where did you deliver the product, but where they're going to make their money is because people forget and they neglect to look at the purchases and where they bought the purchases, even as simple as business cards that you may have ordered from Vistaprint or Moo Printing or one of the online printing companies. Your check stock for your bank, you ordered those checks probably from a location outside the state and you need to pay a use tax on them. Your camera gear that you buy from B&H Video, well, B&H is not in our state. So when you paid for that $1,500, $3,000 camera, you bought that tax-free, but you have to pay the use tax when you file your sales and use tax return. And a lot of people neglect this, and this is where the states are making their money.
This is probably the most important part of this section because this is going to give an instant red flag. You're not paying any use tax, yet you're running a business. And I think so many people, maybe personally, they're used to just buying things online and they get a great deal through Adorama or through B&H or through Amazon or eBay, and they're buying these things and then they're not paying sales tax at all, so they're thinking, oh, like this is better than buying locally. But the second that you start deducting this amount of money from your income and using it as a write-off for your business, that's the second that you have to be paying the sales tax on this, the use tax.
Correct.
And a lot of people, they just don't even think to do this.
They don't. And on the flip side, let's say you are buying from Amazon and eBay for your children and for a personal reason, then you're not running it through the business. Most people don't realize that on their tax return at the end of the year, there's a question. Have you bought anything from out of state and brought it in state that is subject to use tax? People just automatically think no or answer no.
I would assume most everyone at this day and age would have to say yes because everyone's buying something online.
Something during the year.
But at the moment, there's no real system in place. I mean, this is kind of what we're seeing with the issues, the national issue with Amazon.
Correct.
And the issues with, well, they're charging sales tax in certain states and not others. Right. This is a very debated issue that a lot of income is being lost for both the state and government.
Absolutely. And
but
it's a loophole. It will close, but at the moment right now, if you are buying for your business and bringing something out of state into your state, you need to be including it on your use tax return. Very important.
So let's also talk a little bit about use tax. When we're buying things from out of state and shipping it here, we're having to pay sales tax. We talked about paying sales tax when we ship our products to our clients in state. But this use tax can also kind of apply to when we are shipping our product out of state, because we are now acting like Amazon or B&H, and we are shipping a tangible product out of our state of South Carolina, and therefore we are not paying the sales tax here. The liability then kind of falls on the person who's receiving the product.
Yeah, and the liability is on them at the end of the year to say that they received something from out of state into their state, and they should pay the tax on their tax return on April 15th or 1040, personal IRS tax return or their state revenue tax return.
So what we're really recommending is that you take a lot of the sales tax up front so that you have it when it's time to pay. And I know with weddings, it's very difficult to know where you're going to be mailing this because we shoot a lot of destination weddings here and our clients are moving around. A lot of times they might be moving to Charleston. They might be leaving South Carolina altogether. They may be hopping around to other states. So what you can do is either take the sales tax up front and then you have it if you have to ship it into the state. Or you could tell your client you don't need to take sales tax if you know for certain that they're never going to live in your state. But this might be a great negotiation tool because you can now say, I can't lower my rates, but I also don't need to take sales tax because you are living in California and I don't need to take that on my end. So there's a lot to think about here. There's a lot of collecting money and having it in reserves in case you do have to take up that liability. But this is definitely, in my opinion, the number one reason to have a professional on hand, because these questions were so confusing to me, and they change every year. I mean, it could be very soon that you do have to pay taxes to other states, or this digital transfer isn't digital anymore, and that's taxable.
Correct.
All of this is very fluid, and it changes every year, especially as the budgets get tighter and the states and counties and legislation realize that they're losing money on a lot of these transactions.
So hire a professional to help you, to give you the advice that you need. It's very important.
Now, since we're also talking about sales tax and how we should be taking sales tax and use tax and paying use tax as a photographer, there are times where we shouldn't be paying sales tax locally. If we're buying things for our office or things that we're shipping out that are part of the tangible product, we don't want those items to be taxed twice.
Correct.
Can you describe a little bit about what we should be doing if we're buying tangible products that we're then reselling back to our clients?
Yes. So when you buy products that are going to be part of your tangible product that you sell to your end user, to the customer, those items should be purchased tax-free. You should be able to go to the vendor that you're purchasing from, present, in this state it's an ST8A, and in other states it would be a different form, but prove to them that you have a retail license and that you are selling this good that you're buying from them as part of your end product to your customers, and those purchases are tax-free. So that's another reason that you should get a retail license, is because you should be buying these items tax-free. If you end up buying these items and paying tax and then realizing, oh shoot, I should have bought those tax-free, you can always go back to the vendor, present your retail license, and they can refund you back the money.
So some things that might be resellable items, I mean, it might be DVDs, I mean, things like envelopes, are these?
Yeah, if you ship the shipping envelopes that you use, the flash drive, if you deliver your pictures on a flash, that would be tax-free. The boxes, the packaging materials, the albums, all of those.
Yeah, a lot of these things just don't seem like they add up to that much. I mean, it's tape and boxes and shipping costs. At the end of the year, it might be some amount of money, but it's not that much. But the biggest one is going to be things like albums. If you're buying a $1,000 album on eBay to design yourself, or paper and ink and all of that to print and produce this album, or if you're going straight to an album designer and you're buying a $2,000 or $3,000 album to begin with, all of that is eventually going to be passed on to the client.
Correct.
And so those are probably where the biggest savings are going to be, because those are the most expensive items that are part of your tangible product.
Correct.
So just in a quick recap, there's basically two big taxes that we should be aware of. Use tax, things that we're buying and bringing from out of state into our state that otherwise wouldn't be taxed, but legally needs to be taxed and tax needs to be paid on. And then sales tax, kind of the opposite, where we're now shipping out items to our clients and we are bringing in sales tax depending on the county that we're shipping it to. In the case we're shipping it out of state, or it's a digital product, it's shipped through the internet digitally, we actually aren't taking sales tax on that.
Correct. And the other big tax that you need to remember is your federal and state income tax, which everybody pays whether or not they own a business or not. But that's another big tax area that we should talk about briefly, that you want to make sure that if you are turning a profit, if your business is, if you're going to know when you're turning a profit, you actually have money in the bank and you're not scrambling and living check to check. At that point, you should probably be making an estimated tax payment into both the IRS and your state revenue department.
And this would be what most people consider a quarterly payment?
Correct. It's called quarterly estimated tax payment. There are four set payment deadlines, and it's important that if you're making money, that you make these 4 quarterly tax payments, because you will get penalized for not making them.
So you're employed by a normal employer. Every 2 weeks you get a paycheck. This money's automatically coming out. You
Right.
don't even think about it.
Right.
People don't realize
Right.
all the time that they're already paying into taxes. Once you're your own business, you now have to submit taxes, which should be on a quarterly system. But for the first year or two, you may not know how much money you're going to be bringing in. Maybe you're not even turning a product,
Right.
a
Profit.
profit over. So you kind of have a buffer there, probably that first year or so, while you're figuring everything out.
Yeah.
But once you're making a profit, you need to be doing quarterly.
Quarterly tax payments, which is another important reason why you should be keeping up with your books, every month, certainly every quarter, so that and be able to provide and pay that money into the IRS and the Department of Revenue. If you wait till the end of the year, you're going to get penalized each 4 quarters for not making and depositing that money.
So basically on a federal level, you are figuring out what your total income is minus your write-offs so that you have a net income. And then you're basically just dividing that estimated net income into quarters and then paying tax on that.
Right.
So that at the end of the year, you aren't saying, oh my gosh, I owe $4,000 of money maybe I don't have in this huge lump sum you've already paid into the system, which is what you're probably doing at your normal retail job.
Right. Right, and people, don't realize that those withholdings are being taken out of their paycheck. But when you own your own business and you don't have a normal W-2 job and money automatically being taken out, each quarter you should analyze your books and figure out, am I going to owe money to the IRS, and if so, how much? And pay that in. There's easy ways to pay that in. EFTPS is the easiest, and your tax accountant can set up an EFTPS account, and it literally just drafts right out of your account and goes to the IRS and to the state that you live in. And so that money is sitting there in a bucket associated with your name, and at the end of the year when you file your tax return, it will take what did you owe at the end of the year and compare to what you paid in during the year in those 4 quarters and determine if you owe more or if you're in a refund status.
So with the federal government, quarterly reports or returns, but then with the state, it's every single month. Every month you're paying use and sales tax.
Yes, so let me clarify. Every month for the state of South Carolina, you have a sales and use tax return, but you also every quarter for South Carolina have a quarterly estimated tax payment for your income tax. Completely different than that.
Oh, okay, I see.
So yeah, there's 2 different taxes that you need to worry about. Monthly for the sales and use tax, and then quarterly for your income state tax.
So if you guys don't want to deal with this every month and every quarter, get somebody like Kristen, hire her, and it's going to make your life a lot easier.
Yes.
So we've covered a lot about taxes, use tax, sales tax, business licenses, all of these things are going to be owed every single year. Is there any other tax that a photographer should be aware of that they either need to get in place so that it's happening on a monthly or yearly process, or things that they're just not going to be aware of at all?
Yeah, I know in the state of South Carolina, and this is different for every state, but we have a property tax that is due for your business. So that would be a tax that is on your business assets, excluding vehicles. So that would be if you bought an office or a computer, your equipment, your photography cameras and lenses and equipment, anything that was capitalized during the year, which means it wasn't expensed, it has a use greater than 1 year, it has a longer life. Those items, again excluding vehicles, are subject to a property tax that is due. It's usually due middle of January. The bills come out in October, but you file the return in April, and it's usually done in conjunction with your tax return and by your tax accountant. So when you're going to get your tax return done and you are in a state that has a property tax, ask them, will you be completing the property tax return in conjunction with the income tax returns? And you normally have to sign those, so you're aware that they're being done because your signature is on them. And they're usually due April 30th in our state, and every state's different.
And where does that number come from? You've bought all of this equipment. Is it somebody like you is going through and saying camera, and then shipping? That doesn't go in this list. And you're formulating some master list of taxable assets?
This number actually comes directly from your tax return, which is why you have to have your tax return done in order to file the return that generates this property tax bill, which you will pay every year. So again, talk with your tax accountant. They should be familiar with the rules of the state and make sure that it's being done every
So property tax, that's a big one people are going to forget about, but it's really important to make sure that all of that's paid up as well.
Yep.
So let's move on now from taxes and what you should be paying and then also taking in to just really general write-offs. I know you really need to consult to a CPA, and what I've found is every CPA says something different, but there are some basic general rules that we can kind of go with as a photographer that people might not be aware of. I think the biggest one, especially with running f-stoppers, is we're traveling all the time. We can write off all of our travel. We are able to write off a large percentage of meals and entertainment. So if we're taking clients out or we're trying to, have a good time with potential advertisers, we're able to write off a lot of those expenses. Of course, all your camera gear, your travel with gas and that sort of thing. Go through a few things that maybe you found that are unique to photographers in general that they may not think about.
Certainly your website and the cost to maintain your website, which is the vehicle that you use to bring in a lot of your customers, those costs are tax deductible. If you work out of like a home office, a lot of people are really hesitant to take a home office deductions, which is part of your rent, part of your utilities.
And can you describe this? Like, does this need to be a physical room? Does this need to just be square footage? I've heard a lot of mixed things about home offices. Some say it needs to be detached or it needs to be its own room that has no living quarters in it at all.
Right.
Others say it could be in your living room, but as long as you could map out the square footage,
Right.
maybe that's okay. What does somebody need to do if they're going to deduct
I would
a home
definitely
office?
consult a tax accountant because there are certain strict requirements on what the room can have and can't have in order to meet this home office deduction. So certainly talk to a tax accountant, and I don't mind going over to my clients and looking to make sure. I mean, you just want to be really comfortable with your tax accountant and explain to them, is there a window, is there not a window, is there a bed, is there not a bed, is there a closet, because all these things matter and really.
But what's also nice is you can also include utilities too. So if
Right.
you're in a home and you're cooling and using huge computers like we do, that's drawing a lot of energy. You're
Right.
actually able to take a percentage off of the power bill.
Absolutely, your utilities, your rent, anything that is needed for that office. So if you repaint that office or buy a piece of furniture for that office, all that stuff is deductible.
What about like your phone? I mean, is that a percentage? Is it the whole bill? You
Yeah.
can write off a phone.
Typically, yeah. What you're supposed to do is distinguish the personal usage from the business usage. Usually it's a percentage, so 50-50, 60-40, whatever you think. Whatever you can justify to the IRS should you get audited, how much you use your phone for business versus personal. Your internet charge every month from your internet provider. Certainly, if you work out of your home, a percentage of that should be a deduction.
I think a lot of people forget your professional advice, your
Yeah,
counsel.
yeah.
I can have all of my lawyer fees and CPAs and everything. All of that's tax writable.
Right? Equipment rental, certainly all of your gear costs. There's really a lot of, you don't want to guess at this. You want to know, and you want to find somebody you trust and can talk to and ask these questions.
And the whole purpose for writing off, again, because I was so unaware of this, it seemed like tax write-off was this magical word people threw out. But the whole reason is because you're now taking that as a loss from the income that you're bringing in.
Right.
So the more that you can write off, the less profit you're going to have, the less tax you're going to pay, and you actually kind of have control of where you can place your taxable bracket, depending on how you write things off.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you want to owe the government less money, which means you want to make sure you capture all your write-offs. If you don't know what those are, start there. Talk to somebody, get some advice from a professional that can tell you what will be your deductions in your particular industry.
So you have all of these tax write-offs. I think another one that a lot of people are going to want to write off is writing off their subcontractors, which are our assistants. I mean, we've talked a lot about this DVD. Lee and I love to use assistants at our jobs, and those are considered subcontractors. Can you talk just a little bit quickly about how you're using that as a write-off and also how you're billing those clients? They're not clients, they're actually your employees
Vendors.
in a way. Right,
Well, yeah.
vendors.
So there's a very important distinction between a subcontractor and an employee, and it's very important that you realize that the way you pay them and how much you pay them and how you pay them is very, very important. Talk to your tax accountant. Basically, the general rule is if you just hire a second shooter for a wedding and maybe you use them 1 or 2 times, they don't work for you full time, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. They come in, they help you out with a job, and they go on and do either their own business or a second shooter for another photographer. That's typically a subcontractor. If you plan on paying that one particular subcontractor more than $600 in any fiscal year, you are required to issue them a 1099 at the end of the year. In order to issue a 1099, you need to get a W-9 signed, which is, I mentioned it before, a document that just says, here's my name, here's my address, here's my social security number, or my EIN number, depending on how I'm legally formed, and I am a U.S. citizen and I do agree to pay taxes on this. So you get this W-9 if you think you're going to pay them more than $600 in a year, and you give it to your tax accountant or whoever's handling your books. At the end of the year, they will issue a 1099 to that individual, that second shooter, who will then have to claim that money on their income tax return at the end of the year. It is important to know that the IRS is really hot on the difference between who you classify as subcontractor versus who you classify as an employee. Employees work for you. They do exactly what you say. They use your equipment. They go where you tell them to go. There's certain
They're
rules.
clocking in a normal work week.
They're clocking in a normal work week. Just talk to a tax accountant if you think you're in the gray zone and you don't know if you should classify them between a subcontractor and an employee. Because the IRS I cannot stress this enough, they're really hot on this. And if you get audited and they determine that that subcontractor was really an employee, you're going to owe FICA taxes all the way back. So it could really be detrimental to your business. Know how to pay your employees or your subcontractors and what you have to do to keep your nose clean.
And the form is a W-9?
But for a subcontractor, it's a W-9. Now, if you had an employee, it would be a W-4.
Okay. So what I like to do is I just like to give a W-9 to every single person that I hire at the beginning of the year or when I hire them.
Right.
In the event that I pay them more than $600. You may have commercial jobs where you're paying a day rate that's more than $600 and they meet that quota the first time you hire them.
Right.
So as long as you give that form out, you're going to get it back instantly and you're not having to track down all of these people at the end of the year and give them W-9s so that you can issue 1099s.
Correct. And the 1099s are due in January, and those are usually done by a CPA or an accountant.
And that's a huge tax write-off, guys. Like having subcontractors that you pay out. I mean, I use so many assistants throughout the year. I'm happy to pay them. I'm happy to give them another paycheck, but it's also helping me decrease my tax liability by hiring other photographers. So you definitely want to be aware of that. And in terms of keeping up with all of this, we're about to talk about software in just a second, but you need to be keeping all of these receipts. I've heard people say you need to write on any meals and entertainment, like who you met with or what you did.
Right.
Is there anything that you could suggest in kind of keeping everything consolidated?
Well, I would suggest, certainly because you have a ton of receipts and we're constantly swiping the debit card and it can get really, really cumbersome, either use a software, there's one receipt, and there's a lot of apps out there that can help you track, oh, I went to Target, but $50 of the Target was for CDs and 50 of it was my beauty products that is not tax deductible. So you can snap a picture of the receipt, write a note to yourself, whatever. But if you don't have those tools, I would certainly recommend keeping all of your bank statements, all your credit card statements, anything that can prove that you paid out the money for the expense. As far as what receipts you should keep, you don't have to keep your $25 gas receipt and your $12, whatever office supply receipt.
Is there a threshold, anything below 20 bucks?
Well, I recommend to my clients, like really anything over $100, you should keep the receipt if it's part of your business. Like if you bought a camera for $1,500, keep that receipt. I mean, you've got the credit card statement, but I always like to have that receipt in your records in a box somewhere in case you ever were to get audited. But at the end of the day, if you've got your bank statement and you've got your credit card statement, or your Square statement or your PayPal statement, you should be good. So definitely keep your records. And how long should you keep them? Recommended 6 years. So it's a long time.
Yeah. So you need a good binder. You need everything really organized. It's going to make your life a lot easier if you have to be audited or you go through that process. I guess in organization, let's quickly talk about QuickBooks. I know I've used that. You got me going on QuickBooks. And now I've kind of turned the reins over to you to where I'm doing very little in QuickBooks, but I've kind of done both sides of it.
Right.
This software is amazing, guys. Like if you don't have QuickBooks now, you need to get it because it makes things so automated and simple. And if you want to be the person going through each month and reconciling everything, it's the best software I've found.
Right.
You probably know a lot more of the technical details about it than I do.
Yeah, and if you don't have the time or you don't have the knowledge or you don't want to research it, then find one that you can use. If it's even a simple Excel spreadsheet, as long as you have some way to organize, keep it simple. Organize your information. Revenues on this spreadsheet, expenses on this worksheet. I mean, you don't have to go out and buy something like QuickBooks, although I do recommend QuickBooks. I use it. I'm very familiar. There's Peachtree, there's Quicken, there's a ton of tools out there. If you really want to be in the detail and be close to it, which you did back in the beginning, then certainly look into buying one of those softwares or using Excel spreadsheet to help yourself organize. But at the end of the day, it might be easier just to hire somebody who's proficient, and so you don't have to learn.
And that's what I loved about you was you kind of got me going, but I still had a lot of control. And so I know for those first 3 or 4 years, I was looking at my bank statement every month. And what that did for me was it allowed me to see where the income was coming from and where the expenses were going. It also made me really aware of everything that was hitting my account each and every month. And I think if I just thrown the reins to you 100%, I don't know, there was some security of not really knowing how my business worked at that time that
Right.
would have been a little unsettling. But now that I did that for several years, I feel like I kind of know the ins and outs of what my business is doing. So I would personally recommend that you have your hand in there a little bit at the beginning so that you can see what's going on. But once you know that you're turning a profit and things are kind of settled and you feel confident that that Google Ads that's coming out every single month is something that you're happy to pay and you just kind of put in the back of your mind, then you can hand that off to a professional and they can completely take care of it. And if anything pops up, you're going to tell me, hey, Patrick, looks like you're spending $2,000 in advertising and this may be a problem in a couple of months
Right.
if you don't increase your income or something of that nature.
Right, and I think it's important that you find an accountant that you're comfortable with. I have several clients where they hold the master accounting file, whatever it may be, and I log into their computer. And so they've got it at their fingertips at all times. And then there's other clients who, they're not as into the detail, and I keep the master QuickBook file or whatever the accounting product is. So I think it's really important that you find somebody that you can work with, somebody that is flexible, somebody that you trust to meet those needs.
So now that you've made it a full year and you have everything nicely organized and you're using some kind of software and you have all your receipts all filed away, you're going to have to do a tax return. And I think a lot of people are familiar with this if they're employed by somebody. The taxes have kind of already been done for them, but they're having to file something and they're doing a very minimal tax return. But now with your own business, you're going to have to do something a little more substantial. When is the income for the year done? And when does this tax return need to be filed?
Okay, and that's a loaded question. It depends on how you're legally structured. So let's say you're a sole proprietor. Your tax return is due April 15th for the January through December calendar year.
So it's the same as
So it's the same as your personal tax return. It's usually filed on a Schedule C within your personal tax return, which is a 1040. In your state, the same way. Your state tax return is filed the same way. It's all lumped in. Your business expenses have kind of flowed through your personal tax return. But if you're an LLC, S Corp, or partnership, or a C Corp, your tax return is due March 15th, not April 15th.
So a full month
So
ahead.
a full month ahead. And it's still on January 1st through December 31st, unless you've elected to use a different calendar year. But most people use the calendar year, and your tax would be due March 15th. So that's a deadline that a lot of people, let's say you created an S Corp and you really didn't, you're kind of muddling through. A lot of people don't realize, oh my gosh, that tax return is due a month in advance. And the quarterly tax payments also have a different deadline. So you need to be very familiar with how you're legally structured because that impacts what tax return you're going to file and when it's due.
And it's also really important now to hit that January date and start getting everything together to hand off to a CPA to get this going as soon as possible. I mean, the last thing you want is to be into March and have, 2 weeks to get everything together and filed.
Right, and you're also probably going to pay a higher fee to hire, a CPA or a tax accountant in that crazy time because no one's really got the time to take on a new client who hasn't done their books for a year. So constantly be thinking ahead. This is why you should hire a professional to help you stay organized so that you are ready to file this.
And I would even recommend if you have somebody, meet with them in December. I know every December, Lee and I are both meeting with our CPAs and we're talking to you and having you involved in this conversation of figuring out where do we stand at the end of the year? Should we buy new cameras and new equipment to help with more tax write-offs? Or perhaps we should delay things and wait for the next year because we've already bought a lot in the current year. So guys, I hope this was really useful. I know this scared me to death. I mean, when I first got into business and started to figure I have to get a business license and I have to start paying taxes and all of this was being done for me by my employer, it just seemed like such a headache and it was so much stress. And finding you at that first photography meeting just was such a relief off my back because I could now hire somebody who knew exactly what to do. So you were willing to help other photographers here in South Carolina, correct?
Yeah, I'm familiar with South Carolina's laws and regulations, and I certainly love to help people with their business. So give me a call or email me and I'll see what I can do for you. If you're outside the state of South Carolina, I highly recommend that you find somebody that you trust that is referred by other photographers. Don't just find any accountant or CPA, find one that is knowledgeable in your industry, one that has other photography clients or videographer clients. Those are the ones that are going to really know the ins and the outs, not just any old tax accountant.
And this is so important because if you go to a normal CPA, they're going to think like, what in the world? This person's traveling and they're buying electronic equipment, which seems like a lot of industries aren't able to write off. And we just live a really fun lifestyle with a lot of interesting things that we can write off as photographers. And I think it's really important that, you have a CPA that's very familiar with what you're doing. They're familiar with the tangible product that might seem like a service. They're aware that you're shipping out products to different states and all of the things that we've talked about through this section. So this was a very necessary segment for this whole DVD. I think wedding photographers need to be aware of all of this. It's so important, and it can be such a liability if you don't tackle this initially. So don't let this scare you too much. If you want to do this on your own, feel free to jump headfirst into it, but I think through this conversation, it's quite clear why you should hire a professional, and it's made my life so much easier in dealing with all the financial stuff on the back end of running a successful wedding business. So give Kristen a call. I have all of her information below. If you're in South Carolina, if you're in another state or even in another country, all of these laws can be very different state to state, country to country. So make sure that you find someone locally that's going to be able to help you out and get everything as simple as possible. That's probably the most important thing. We want to be out there taking pictures and running our businesses. We don't want to be sitting behind computers figuring out taxes. That's the last thing we need to do, and luckily we have professionals to help us with that.
I'd love to help.
So Kristen, thank you so much for having this conversation. I know this isn't the most exciting thing to always talk about, but it's so awesome to have somebody who knows exactly what's going on, and it's made my life and Lee's life a lot easier. So we really, really appreciate it.
You're welcome.